good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Mindspeak. It's a real pleasure to be hosting Madame Christine Lagarde today. Madame Lagarde, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Very comprehensive, I have to say. Good afternoon, Jumbo. Bon après-midi, mesdames et messieurs les ambassadeurs, monsieur l'ambassadeur de France. You started with a quote, so I'm going to compete with you, because it clearly inspired you. And the one that inspired me, and that has actually led me to the position that I'm in now, but that has also inspired me during the course of my journey in my professional life, was a quote by Paul Valéry, written shortly after the Second World War, which, translated in my poor English, goes something like, let's put in common the best that we individually have and enrich ourselves with our differences. And that is, for me, the definition of diversity at its best, and the one that can inspire those. In French, it goes, mettons en commun ce que nous avons de meilleur et enrichissons-nous de nos différences. And that is something that has guided me in my professional life, and that has certainly been inspirational, particularly in the position that I'm in at the IMF. I would like to thank the two of you, as well as you, Bob, for hosting, organizing, introducing me, and gathering this group of entrepreneurs, leaders, and representatives of various other nations as ambassadors or members of the diplomatic corps. And I regard you as entrepreneurs as well, because in your respective ways, you also represent interests, and you have to market those interests. So I include you in the group of entrepreneurs, most of you. Now, I'm particularly pleased to appear in front of you, and it's a rare privilege, actually, to appear before entrepreneurs. I generally hang out with prime ministers, presidents, ministers of finance, governors of central banks. And it can be incredibly boring. But it sure is repetitive, however necessary. But to be with you today is clearly to be with those that create wealth, to those who create jobs, to those who need predictability around their business, who invest in the future, who need to have a strategy, and who are actually vital for the growth of the country in which they operate. And you are, as a collective body, a source of the growth that has been created by Kenya in the last few years. I'll say a few more words about that. But you've achieved that through multiple sectors. My brief here says through a vibrant service sector, and that is clearly the case with access to a technology platform. But I would hasten to add that it's not only limited to the service industry, which is critical and sizable in your country, but technology, innovation, a strategic thinking can also be applied to multiple other sectors. And I would, as I said, hasten to add that agriculture, for instance, or manufacturing can be sources of productivity, the right thinking from growth to market, from the dream to the product. And clearly, you are doing that in your respective positions. I would like to quote, because you've done two quotes, if I recall, I would like to quote the late Kenyan Nobel laureate, Wangari Maathai, and she used to say, I want to quote her properly, "There are great opportunities even in the most difficult of moments." And I believe this conviction underlies the resilience of Kenya's private sector. Now, indeed, when you look at numbers, Kenya's economic gains over the last few years have been nothing short of remarkable. Coming on the heels of a delicate political transition, growth remains robust at more than 5% in 2013. It's a number, I have to tell you, that many countries around the world would envy Kenya. And there was a set of bold economic reforms that have laid the foundations to lift the economy to middle income status within the next decade. Is that a dream? Is that a tantrum? Is that a fantasy? No, it is something that can be achieved if the right reforms are followed through, are implemented, and if fiscal discipline is observed. Another reason why it is so important for us, IMF. And when I say us, it's not the royal us. It's Antoinette, Domenico, and our resident representative and his family, who are both present here today. Another reason why we are very happy to be here is that we are trying to demonstrate that the IMF is not just that esoteric institution headquartered in Washington. The IMF is a partner. And the IMF is a partner in the countries that want the partnership, that need the partnership, whether it's through financing, whether it's through technical assistance, whether it's through capacity building, whether it's through surveillance and policy recommendation. That's the business of the IMF. And it's not our business. It's the business of 188 members that actually own the IMF, finance the IMF, and benefit from the IMF. So that partnership is something that is dear to our heart, that is not only applying in good times. We were by the side of Kenya in 2009 when the crisis hit. We were by the side of Kenya in 2011 when the drought affected you. And we were by the side of Kenya at the time of the very unfortunate Westgate tragedy. We have provided financial support through the extended credit facility, as you've just mentioned. And I'm very happy that our executive board that represents the 188 members, as only a few weeks ago, put its seal of approval on the successful completion of the extended credit facility, close to the $1 billion that you quoted earlier on. We've also worked with the Kenyan government as it designed and implemented some of its reforms, and we supported that agenda, as I said, with financing, with advice, with stepped-up technical assistance. So the IMF has been a partner through thick and thin. We take the rough and the smooth, and we navigate with you if you so wish. But we have to be very clear on one point. It is not the IMF achievement. It is not the IMF success. It is Kenya's achievements. It is Kenya's decisions. It is Kenya's success. And it is because Kenya has full ownership of all that, that it is your success. And the IMF is just a partner on the side. Great, you all think. Now is the time to commend Kenya for its performance. Yes. But not a time for complacency, as many of you have heard and have said in your respective business when the results are good. Now is the time to just continue. And I will use the C of continue a bit later on in my remarks to you. Because looking ahead, Kenya needs to improve on its performance, needs to continue to implement reforms, has embarked on very ambitious projects, such as devolution, such as the monetary integration. Those are really tough projects to conduct. And you know what it means to manage a project, to conduct it to completion, to enlist the support, and to make sure that it works. Those will be difficult projects in order to reap the benefit of them and to generate growth and to create jobs. So in that context, what I would like to do this afternoon, before I take questions from you, is tackle three areas. One is I would like to say a few words about the global economic outlook. Second, focus and narrow on East Africa. And then really identify what are the challenges and what are the opportunities for Kenya. And I'm looking at it from an economic point of view, from a financial stability point of view, because that's the business the IMF is in. Let's look at the global economic environment. We will be coming out in about 3 weeks' time with revised numbers. I've said it before, I'm saying it again, they're likely to be revised slightly upwards, which is good news in and of itself. We've been revised downwards so many times lately. In and of itself, it's good news. And we are certainly better off today than we were only 5 years ago. But we're not out of the woods yet. As I said, Kenya is to be commended, but no time for complacency. The same is true for the global economy. Major projects have been made, major progress has been made, but we're not out of the woods. The global recovery that is underway remains uneven and subdued. And I'm going to look at each of the global economic areas in turn. If we look at the advanced economies, the recent indicators are showing progress and a clear recovery. That is certainly the case in the United States of America, where the private sector is leading the recovery and where we should expect some good results primarily out of the private sector. And despite the fiscal consolidation that has been very heavy over the last couple of years. In Japan, as you know, the government has taken important steps to stimulate growth. It's a combination of a very ambitious and novel monetary policy, together with structural reforms and some support to economic growth in Japan. It still remains to be said as to whether this complex set of 3 arrows, otherwise known as Abenomics, is going to actually deliver the expected results. But so far, it's heading in the right direction. And while Europe is slowly emerging from a deep recession, it still has a lot to do in terms of structural reforms. That's for the advanced economies. So we're seeing progress, clearly led by the US, lower degree Japan, lower degree Europe, but all out of the recession. If we look now at the emerging market economies, they have for many years been the engine for growth. That is slowing down a bit. You will hear some alarming sounds about the slow growth of emerging markets. Well, let's be sensible. It's not that slow. It's slower than it was, and their role in as an engine for growth is certainly going to be slightly changed. Why is it important for you? Well, it's important for Kenya and Africa in general because the relationship and the spillover from what is happening in the emerging markets is going to affect or hit the African countries that have strong ties to those emerging markets, and it is the case for Kenya. Actually, when you look at the last 5 years, it's fascinating to see how the strong growth of emerging market economies have actually sheltered and put a shield on some of the African countries and have protected them in a certain way. So any change in the emerging markets is bound to be a matter of concern for the Kenyan economy. As financial conditions in advanced economies normalize, it's already beginning in the US with a revised monetary policy, well announced and communicated. It will be the case as well gradually over time with the ECB and probably later on down the road with the Bank of Japan. The risk of heightened volatility in financial markets may create new challenges in emerging market economies. No matter how much good communication is done, no matter how much additional buffers are put in place, no matter what controls there is, we can expect a degree of volatility in the emerging markets because the capital that flew out to the emerging markets for a period of time when the long-term interest rates in the US were so low is likely to reverse and flow out of those emerging markets, at least to a certain degree, as the long-term interest rates in the United States is likely to increase. There is also the risk of potential spillovers, and I would call them the sort of secondary spillover, if you will. The first level of spillovers effects are the ones derived from the change of monetary policies. Capital flew in, will flow out. This is the first spillover effect. If those emerging market economies that suffer as a result of the capital outflow themselves slow down a bit in their growth, that is likely to affect countries such as sub-Saharan African countries, countries that supply commodities in significant quantities. It is the case for Kenya. Now that brings me to my second point, which is what's the outlook for sub-Saharan Africa? And here the news is quite encouraging. In fact, sub-Saharan Africa remains the second fastest growing region in the world. You probably wonder what is the first. Well, the first is the developing Southeast Asian countries. They move even faster. The rate over the last decade as an average for sub-Saharan Africa is 5.6%. And Africa is now finally beginning to take its right seat at the table of prosperity from a global economic point of view. Countries in Eastern Africa in particular have experienced strong growth for the last decade. And in many countries, that growth has contributed to higher living standards and poverty reduction. Low inflation, reduced levels of public debt, and adequate reserve levels have helped to shield much of the region from the crisis. Now, what do we expect for Sub-Saharan Africa? We estimate, and that's our October estimates, it might be raised a little bit, but our October estimates place 5% growth in 2013 and close to 6% for 2014. But this outlook is not without risk, as I said. Policymakers, as a result, must remain extremely vigilant to threats from slower demand in emerging market economies, unfavorable changes in commodity prices, or higher financing costs. Let's face it, we've had the lower, cheapest financing costs ever, pretty much around the world. That will inevitably change. Now, looking forward, just as I said for Kenya, Sub-Saharan Africa cannot afford complacency because immense challenges remain. Africa can and must grow faster and better in order to address pressing social problems, provide jobs for its young and growing population. Poverty, which has reduced, as I said, remains at unacceptably high levels, and progress towards the Millennium Development Goals remain too slow. Indeed, Africa Rising, which will be the subject of a major conference the IMF is organizing in partnership with the government of Mozambique, Africa Rising is a theme that is on the horizon of pretty much all investors, whether private sectors, foreign direct investment, international governmental agencies, what have you. Incidentally, this conference is organized in May in cooperation with the government of Mozambique. The finance minister and the governor of the central bank of Kenya are invited. And just as we had a conference back in September called Kenya Ready to Take Off, that conference in Mozambique will actually focus on stock-taking of Africa economic successes as well as the challenges ahead. It will bring together the best academics, the best economists, the best leaders focusing on Africa, and many of them originating from Africa. Now let me now turn to my third topic and the main theme of today's meetings, which is Kenya's quest to become that middle-income economy. Kenya today is categorized, from our perspective as IMF, as a frontier economy. The impressive turnaround in its performance in the outcome of important changes in the economic, political, and social landscape over the past few years qualify it to be that frontier economy. What has caused it? Well, prudent policies, fiscal discipline, an improvement of the external and domestic debt position, a more modern framework for monetary policy that has kept inflation expectations in check, and all of that despite adverse shocks. That's what has caused Kenya to be where it is at the moment. What has helped as well is the improvement of supervisory powers that have maintained financial stability even as the financial system is expanding rapidly and capital markets are opening up. What is the result? Well, Kenya has built a strong external position and is now in a favorable condition to tap international financial markets with a soon-to-be-issued Eurobond. Now, going forward, as Kenya becomes more integrated in the global economy, it is bound to be exposed and more exposed to external shocks through spillovers from trading partners' economies or volatility in international financial markets. Further bolstering its foreign reserve position and lowering its debt burden will ensure that the country is resilient to these shocks. By strengthening its economy, higher buffers, more reserves, it will be better able to resist external shocks. Now, the economic results are not obtained in a vacuum. There has to be political buy-in, there has to be political sustainability. And Kenya has not only overhauled its form of government by implementing the 2010 constitution, but it has also gone through a delicate political transition that culminated in the March 2013 peaceful elections. Kenya's new system of checks and balances means that management of public resources is now more transparent and subject to more accountability. These changes should support overall economic stability. I cannot insist enough on those issues. Transparency, publication of information, accountability, particularly at a time when the country has uncovered and will be exploiting significant resources that will fuel the economy with additional resources. What is also remarkable about the Kenyan economy, and which is a recent development, is the financial inclusion that you have managed to develop. The fact that almost 70%, or slightly over 70%, of the population is now accessing financial services is also an engine for development. What does this mean practically speaking? It means that millions of Kenyans who were previously outside the financial sector may have a stake in the economy. The younger generation, the women in particular, can be empowered as a result. And Kenya has indeed come a long way over the past few years. Now the key is now to keep on building. And I would apply here the rule of the 3 C's. Now you probably wonder what those 3 C's are, and you might even remember what they are. Okay, my first C is completing successfully the fiscal devolution. I'll say more in a minute. My second C is closing the infrastructure gap. And the third C is continuing regional integration. Okay, on the first C, which is completing successful fiscal devolution. And all words actually matter. I think we can all agree that devolution and fiscal decentralization are important steps. And yes, the process will be complex. And the risks are very significant. But I recognize that expectations are high, and they have to be managed. So it is crucial that devolution be implemented successfully, crucial to secure access to resources to all parts of the country, and crucial to ensure that every region gets to benefit from improved economic conditions. If done properly, this kind of devolution can bolster social cohesion by increasing accountability in the management of public resources, by actually identifying close to the ground what the service providers are, who they are, whether they exist, whether they should be rewarded. But turning to the risks, it is imperative that this devolution be done right, be controlled, be audited, be reported, and that people in charge of that devolution be accountable to the public. It means that spending needs must remain within the available envelope of public resources and be transparent. It also means avoiding duplication of functions between the central and the local government. As Minister of Finance for France, I've gone through that. Devolution can be very attractive. It's a seducing concept. When you look at the textbook, it makes sense. But implementing it and making sure that the technocrats who are trying to do a good job do not fall prey to the political appetite of those who want to build fiefdom, that is the tricky thing. And that is where implementation, control, and accountability matter. And that's where the private sector, if I may say, can actually add. Because technology platforms can actually achieve a lot of that transparency, accountability, access to information, reconciliation between what is spent centrally, what is spent locally, identification of service providers, elimination of those that actually do not exist, and so on and so forth. And I very much hope that the private sector that you are representing can actually link up to the government to make sure that those projects are actually monitored and actually produce the benefits that are expected by the people who have huge expectations. My second C, closing infrastructure gaps. Kenya still has large infrastructure gaps that must be tackled if growth is to be raised and jobs created. I know there are lots of corporates that actually come to Kenya to set up business, to open shops. But if they don't have access to power, if they have no predictability about the transportation of their goods, or if the warehousing in the port where they ship their goods is uncertain or is going to take forever, then the foreign direct investment might not be pursued. And this is particularly true in a country where newfound natural resource wealth is an opportunity to lift economic prospects, where these resources need to be exploited wisely and transparently. Now, Kenya is currently building a fiscal and regulatory regime to govern the use of revenues from natural resources development. It's the case in mining, for instance. This should provide a transparent framework for investors and a stable base for government revenue. Beyond that, the use of these fiscal resources should be carefully prioritized and the quality of infrastructure projects closely scrutinized. The IMF stands ready to continue to provide extensive technical assistance on these issues. We don't force our services down the throat of our members, by the way. The members ask for us to help if they need us. Foreign investment should also be encouraged to help plug the infrastructure needs. I understand that foreign investors are interested in financing major projects, such as the construction of modern railway lines from the coastal area of Kenya to neighboring countries, and the expansion of geothermal power generation. Again, these types of financing should be encouraged, provided that they remain consistent with sustainable debt. This is an issue with which we debate with many developing countries, where the appetite is large, where the financiers are many, and where the debt has to be sustainable going forward, and where concessional versus non-concessional lending has to be arbitrated adequately in order to preserve the sustainability of the country. My third and last C, continuing regional integration. In sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya has led the way in the process of regional integration. It is now the second largest investor in the region and a strong advocate of regional economic integration in the context of the East African community. Regional integration has opened up new markets, supported the emergence of a middle class, enabled domestic demand to become an engine of growth. And it's a very beautiful concept, but one that needs to be implemented in practical terms, in real life, where the removal of some tariff barriers, for instance, should not be replaced by the instauration of non-tariff barriers, where the licensing fees or the additional tax from one country to the other should not actually hamper the regional integration. Now, recently, the roadmap to monetary union was signed by the leaders of the East African countries. And as a French national, as a member of the Monetary Union of Europe, I have to tell you that it's a very ambitious, exciting project. One where, as Aristotle would put it, you should hasten slowly in order to make sure that all the steps are taken and all the boxes are checked. Don't rush. Make sure that you learn from our mistakes and that the East African Monetary Union can actually teach the Europeans how to do it right. I'm serious about it. There are multiple lessons, multiple experiences to learn from, to draw from, whether it's the European Monetary Union, the Caribbean unions, the West African Union. From all those unions, there are mistakes, pitfalls, gaps, omissions that can be learned from. And I hope that this will be the case here, and that the convergence criteria are not just pie in the sky, but are real, tangible, and actually respected, which actually goes through a degree of devolution in and of itself by some forgiveness of sovereignty as a last resort. And that's the most difficult part. Now let me conclude. Over the past several years, Kenya has embarked upon a successful journey that has transformed its economy. This has been achieved with leadership and support from the public sector, but also largely through the effort of a vibrant private sector. This partnership has increasingly helped to lift the Kenyan people out of poverty and generate job opportunities. Who am I to say that? Have I been around Nairobi? Have I looked at the slums? A few 6 years ago, yes. Not recently. And I'm told by some of my women colleagues with whom I just shared lunch, fantastic Kenyan entrepreneurs, fantastic Kenyan women, that the poverty level in Kenya is still there and still worth the fight. But I was also given a message of hope, which is that there are plenty of resources, plenty of goodwill, plenty of talent from all corners of society to actually make sure that the Kenyan development is not hostage to only a few, but is actually shared, because inclusiveness of growth is a clear demonstration of sustainability. This is something that we will be focusing at the time of our spring meeting in Washington. Is inclusiveness actually conducive to sustainability? The preliminary research that we have done concludes that yes, it is the case. And on that note, I would like to finish with a topic that I have not touched on in those 3 points, but that is dear to my heart, which is that of education. Education of all. Education of young people, boys and girls, but also education of those that have gone through the path of life without necessarily accessing education, which is actually the key to unleashing the potential that people have available. It's one thing to find oil and gas and geothermal energy, but it's even better to actually unleash the potential that people have to actually exploit those resources. So I hope very much that having reached that sort of primary level education for all will also encourage you through various means, including donations, scholarships, support, but also the public authorities to actually push those goals of secondary and university education for all further and deeper. This is certainly my strong wish for Kenya and its development, so that Kenya can actually conclude that journey towards middle-income status. Journey is not over. It will be full of difficulties, bumps, pitfalls, and high hopes. I've tried today to chart out how that path can be successfully navigated in the near term. And as the Kenyan wisdom goes, forgive the translation, pamoja twasonga mbele. Okay. I'm confident that Kenya will actually continue to move forward and to move together. Asante sana. Thank you very much.